6 trucks pulled into her driveway that morning. By the time they left, they'd taken everything she had. But here's what nobody in that convoy knew. Not the driver, not the man watching from the truck at the top of the lane, not even Maren Cole herself. Something had been buried on that farm for over 60 years, waiting, directly behind a smokehouse nobody had opened in decades. And in the next 4 minutes, a 13-year-old boy chasing 2 barn owls was about to find it and blow the whole thing wide open. This is the story of a woman who lost her entire harvest in one morning and found something underground worth more than the land itself. Stick around. It gets strange fast. The bank doesn't send a letter when they're about to take everything from you. They send trucks. Maren Cole stood barefoot in the frost, coffee gone cold in her hand, counting them as they backed one by one down her driveway. 6 grain trailers, 200 acres of corn, 14 months of work, planted alone after she buried her husband, back when half the county whispered she wouldn't make it past spring. Now it was all leaving, in someone else's trucks, headed for someone else's elevator, 11 miles down the highway. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just watched. The man holding the clipboard wouldn't meet her eyes. His name was Grady. He worked for Holt Ferris, the man sitting at the top of her lane in a truck that cost more than her house, engine running, window up. Ferris never got out. He liked to watch trouble happen from a distance, the way some men watch a storm they already know is coming. And here's the part that still eats at her. It wasn't theft, not on paper. 11 months earlier, when her grain dryer failed and rot was eating her crop alive, Ferris Grain was the only outfit within 50 miles with the equipment to save it. She signed his contract without a second read. Buried on page 4 was a clause about shared harvest value in event of default. She read it twice. She missed the one sentence that mattered. By the time the last trailer disappeared down the road, she had nothing left in that field but stubble, and a debt bigger than the corn had ever been worth. That was the exact second her nephew came sprinting out of the tree line, breathless, pointing behind him. Aunt Maren, the ground back there behind the smokehouse. It sunk in like something's under it. She barely heard him, but some part of her, the stubborn part, the part that kept this farm alive through 3 lean years and 1 funeral, filed it away. Because if there was one thing Maren Cole had that Holt Ferris never would, it wasn't money. It wasn't land. It was that she noticed things other people walked straight past. She was 31, raised on coal land outside a town in western Kentucky small enough that the gas station doubled as the post office. Her father, dead 2 winters now, heart giving out mid-harvest. Her mother, gone to her sister's place not long after, unable to look at those fields without seeing her husband's empty tractor seat. That left Maren, her 13-year-old nephew, Jonah, who'd come to live with her when his own parents couldn't, and Pruitt, an old hired hand who stayed on for half what he was worth, because he loved that ground more than his knees could handle at his age. She wasn't blameless in any of it, too proud to ask for help when the dryer failed, too stubborn to admit she was drowning until the trucks were already in her yard. Some nights she snapped at Jonah over nothing, then lay awake wondering if she was holding this farm together out of love, or because she didn't know how to let go of anything with her father's handwriting still on it. But she noticed things. A fence post leaning a half-inch too far. The way fog sat different over wet ground than dry. And now, a straight, unnatural sink line in the dirt behind a smokehouse nobody had touched in 60 years. Holt Ferris ran close to 9,000 acres across 2 counties. A fleet of combines that looked like they'd never touched soil. A name that got him a seat at the State Farm Bureau table every year, without asking. He wasn't cruel. That's what made him dangerous. He genuinely believed the contract was fair. She'd signed it under no threat, but circumstance, and to him, that made it just the cost of doing business. "I don't enjoy this part," he told his foreman that morning, watching the trailers roll in. "But somebody's got to run a tight operation." What he didn't say out loud, what he barely let himself think, was that coal land had interested him for a reason that had nothing to do with grain debt. His grandfather and Maren's great-grandfather had farmed next to each other once, back when the county was still mostly woods and mule teams. And there had always been an old story floating around, the kind nobody took seriously anymore, about a strain of corn the Cole family grew that wouldn't take root anywhere else in the county. Ever. Ferris had forgotten the story existed until his own seed manager mentioned, almost as a throwaway comment, that soil samples off the old Cole home place showed something no modern hybrid could explain. He wanted this settled quiet, clean, no lawyers, nothing that raised questions. But underneath that, quietly, he wanted to know what else was buried out there. For Maren, that harvest wasn't a number on a spreadsheet. 1,200 bushels were already promised against the feed bill she'd carried since her father's funeral. Another chunk was supposed to cover the note on the combine. The bank had sent 2 letters about that already. The rest was meant to patch the barn roof before winter, and finally pay Pruitt something closer to what 30 years of loyalty was worth. Every trailer that rolled off her land took a piece of all of it with it. When the dust finally settled, Maren sat down hard on her porch steps and put her face in her hands. And for the first time since her father's funeral, she let herself cry where only Jonah could see. "We're not done," she said, wiping her face. "We're just behind." She didn't believe it yet. She just needed to hear it out loud. Jonah hadn't stopped thinking about that sunken ground. That smokehouse had sat half-collapsed and buried in wild vine for as long as he could remember. Older than the barn, maybe older than the house. His grandfather used to say it had stood there since before the war. Which war, he never said. But that morning, Jonah had watched 2 barn owls circle low over that exact patch of ground, again and again, like they were guarding it. When he walked out to check, the earth under his boots gave, not like dirt, like a floor. That night, once the house had gone quiet and Maren had finally stopped snapping at everyone out of exhaustion, he pulled at her sleeve. "I know you don't care right now," he said, "but I really think there's something under there." Something in his voice, steady, sure, older than 13. Mayer stopped and actually listened. The next morning, they walked out there with 2 flashlights and a crowbar. What they were about to pull out from under that smokehouse was going to unravel everything Maren thought she knew about her own family, and exactly why Hope Ferris had wanted this land settled fast, quiet, and clean. If you have followed those owls the second you saw them circling, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and hit subscribe now, because what's buried under that smokehouse is the entire reason this story exists. The door was low, wood gone soft and gray, reinforced with iron strap hinges rusted the color of dried blood. It wasn't part of the smokehouse at all. It was built into a second structure entirely, dug half into the earth beneath it, like someone had wanted it forgotten on purpose. It took nearly an hour to clear enough vine and rotted board just to reach it. When the door finally groaned open, dust rolled out in a slow gold cloud, caught in the morning light, streaming through the gap in the boards above. The smell hit Maren first. Dry husk, old cedar, and something underneath it like machine oil that had sat untouched for half a century. Jonah's flashlight found it before she did. Rows of small wooden crates, stacked floor to ceiling, labeled in faded pencil. Not raw grain. Seed. Hundreds of ears, carefully tied in bundles, each crate marked with year. 1954, 1958, 1961, and a name that made Maren's chest go tight. Eco, her great-grandfather. Why would a man hide seed instead of selling it? Why bury an entire structure beneath another one, rather than simply lock a door? And why, in over 60 years, had nobody in her family ever once mentioned it? She carried one of the smaller crates back to the house that night and sat with it at the kitchen table long after Jonah had gone to bed, running her thumb over kernels narrower, harder, more deeply colored than anything she'd ever planted. Some kind of old, open-pollinated flint corn. The sort farmers grew before hybrid seed took over the Midwest for good. She didn't know what she was looking at yet, but she knew it mattered, because 3 days later, Hope Ferris's truck came back up her lane. And this time he got out. "Word travels in a small county," Ferris said, standing at a respectful distance from her porch, had in his hands a way that looked almost like an apology. "Heard you found something out by that old smokehouse." Maren said nothing. "I'm not here to take anything else," he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, he didn't sound entirely sure of himself. "My grandfather used to talk about corn that grew on this land that didn't behave like anything else in the county. Survived droughts that put everybody else out of business. I always figured it was an old man's exaggeration. And that was the moment Maren understood, with a cold little jolt. This had never been about the harvest debt at all. Or rather, it had been about that, and something much bigger. The entire time, she started asking around. Pruitt remembered only that her great-grandfather had been strange about one corner of the north field, wouldn't let anybody near it, not even family. The county extension office pointed her toward a retired agriculture teacher named Odell Marsh, a woman in her 80s who still kept Farm Bureau newsletters boxed and labeled going back to 1962. Like Odell said, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. Grew a Flint variety his own father brought over from Seed Exchange before the hybrids came in and swallowed everything. Stubborn as a fence post about it. Wouldn't sell it, wouldn't share it. Because back then, seed companies bought up unique strains and licensed them right out from under the farmers who bred them. He hid his best stock, so nobody could pressure him into signing it away. Maren sat back slowly. He buried it, she said, so nobody could take it. The same way somebody almost just took my whole harvest. Odell nodded. History's got a funny way of rhyming, dear. The county wouldn't recognize a seed for certified planting without a documented lineage. So Maren did the only thing she could. She planted a test batch herself in secret in a hidden corner of the north field. It came up thin and uneven. She'd rushed the soil prep, too desperate for results to properly study her great-grandfather's methods first. For a full week, she believed she'd wasted the one thing that might actually save this place. Then, going to the crate a second time, she found it a false bottom, and beneath it, a second set of notes. Planting dates, soil amendments, a rotation schedule built around clover and old hand-turned compost, the kind of slow, unglamorous method modern farming had abandoned decades ago as inefficient. Her great-grandfather hadn't just saved a seed. He'd saved a method that made it thrive. This time, she followed his notes exactly. Cover crop first, compost worked in by hand, planting depth a full inch deeper than any modern guide recommended. It was slow work, the kind that doesn't look like much on paper. A woman on her knees in the dirt every morning, checking soil moisture with her bare fingers, day after day, waiting. By July, the test plot stood green and stubborn straight through a heat spell that left Ferris's hybrid fields 2 counties over showing visible stress. By August, during the driest stretch that Park Kentucky had seen in almost a decade, her great-grandfather's flint corn held its color, while entire fields of modern hybrid around her wilted pale and curled in the heat. She didn't celebrate. She walked those rows every morning for 2 weeks straight, half convinced she was imagining it, before she let herself believe what her own eyes were telling her. Ferris saw her from the county road. He stopped his truck at her fence line and stood there a long time, saying nothing at all. A week later, he came back with an offer, a generous one, a licensing partnership that would have set Maren up comfortably for the rest of her life, in exchange for exclusive rights to develop and sell the Cole Flint strain through his company. She thought about it for exactly one night. "You wanted my harvest because you figured that was everything I had," she told him, standing on the same porch where she'd once cried where only Jonah could see. "It wasn't. And I'm not selling you the one thing my family ever hid from men who thought money made them owed something." Ferris didn't argue. Something in his face suggested he'd expected exactly that answer, and respected it more than he let on. Instead, Maren proposed something else. A smaller, fairer licensing deal, one that let her keep control of the seed, with Ferris covering the harvest debt as a straight, interest-free repayment, plus a public acknowledgement that the strain belonged to the Cole family name. He agreed. It cost him more pride than money, and they both knew it. The farm looks different now. The barn roof is patched. The bins are full. Pruitt finally gets paid what he's worth, and grumbles about it anyway, because that's who he is. The old smokehouse still stands at the edge of the property, but it isn't hidden anymore. Maren rebuilt its roof herself, board by board, and turned it into what she now calls the Farm Seed Library, where every year's Flint harvest gets set aside, labeled in her own handwriting, the same way her great-grandfather once did in secret, 60 years before she was even born. Some evenings, she sits out there alone, the door open, watching the light change over a field that very nearly wasn't hers anymore. She thinks about how close she came to losing everything to a piece of paper she didn't read closely enough. And she thinks about an old man, decades gone, who understood something it took her the hard way to learn. That the wealth worth protecting isn't always what you can sell this season. Sometimes it's what somebody had the wisdom to bury, and the patience to wait for the right person to come find it. If this story got you, if you have gone out to that smokehouse the second those owls started circling, tell us where you're watching from tonight, and whether you'd have made the same call Maren did. Hit subscribe if you want more real, grounded stories about land, family, and the kind of history that doesn't stay buried forever.